Welcome to my channel Crimson Reaper. Story 1, The Forgotten Mausoleum. Nestled in the outskirts of a small town was an old cemetery, largely forgotten by the living. Among its ancient tombstones and dilapidated crypts stood a grand, albeit crumbling, mausoleum. Local legend spoke of a wealthy family that once owned the mausoleum, known for their eccentric and reckless nature. As time passed, the family died off, and their resting place fell into disrepair. In recent years, curious urban explorers began to flock to the cemetery, drawn by tales of ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds emanating from the mausoleum. One such group, consisting of friends Emily, Jack and Sarah, decided to investigate the site one cold moonless night. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they navigated through the overgrown pathways until they reached the imposing structure. The air grew noticeably colder as they approached the mausoleum, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. With a creak, they pushed open the heavy iron door, revealing a grand chamber lined with dusty coffins and cobweb-covered statues. Emily, an avid historian, began reading the inscriptions on the coffins, fascinated by the dates and names. Jack, always the skeptic, scoffed at the eerie atmosphere, while Sarah nervously filmed their surroundings. As they ventured deeper into the mausoleum, they discovered a hidden staircase leading to a lower level. The stairs groaned under their weight as they descended into a dimly lit corridor. At the end of the corridor stood a single, ornate coffin unlike any they had seen before. It was adorned with intricate carvings and a heavy, rusted lock. Jack, eager to prove that there was nothing supernatural about the place, pried open the lock with a crowbar. The coffin lid creaked open, releasing a cloud of dust and a foul stench. Inside lay the decayed remains of a man, clutching a tattered journal to his chest. Emily carefully removed the journal and began to read its contents aloud. The journal chronicled the life of the last surviving member of the family, a man who had dabbled in dark rituals to extend his life. As the entries progressed, they became increasingly frantic, detailing his attempts to summon a malevolent spirit to grant him immortality. The final entry was a chilling plea for forgiveness, as he realized the entity he had summoned was far more powerful and malevolent than he had anticipated. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and an oppressive darkness filled the chamber. Sarah's camera flickered and died, and their flashlights began to dim. A low, guttural growl echoed through the corridor, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. Jack, trying to keep his composure, urged them to leave immediately. As they hurried back towards the staircase, a shadowy figure materialized before them. It was the spirit of the man, his eyes hollow and filled with despair. He reached out a skeletal hand, and the group felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Desperation set in, and they sprinted up the stairs, the spirit in hot pursuit. They burst through the mausoleum door, and into the night, the oppressive presence lifting as they crossed the threshold. Gasping for breath, they vowed never to return to the cemetery. In the days that followed, Emily researched the family and discovered that the mausoleum had been sealed off for a reason. The spirit of the man, cursed by his own dark dealings, was bound to the mausoleum, seeking revenge on anyone who disturbed his eternal rest. The group never spoke of their encounter again, and the cemetery remained a place of fear and superstition, its secrets buried with the dead. Story 2, The Phantom Groundskeeper. For decades, Hillside Cemetery had been maintained by a solitary groundskeeper named Walter. Walter was a quiet, unassuming man who took great pride in his work, ensuring that every grave was meticulously cared for and every pathway kept clear. The townsfolk spoke fondly of him, grateful for his dedication to preserving the resting place of their loved ones. One cold autumn night, however, Walter passed away in his small cottage on the cemetery grounds. The town mourned his loss, and a new groundskeeper, Ben, was hired to take over his duties. Ben was young and inexperienced, but eager to prove himself. From his first day on the job, Ben noticed strange occurrences. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in odd places. The faint sound of shoveling could be heard at odd hours, and fresh flowers would appear on certain graves though no visitors had been seen. Ben dismissed these events as mere coincidences or the result of overactive imagination. One evening, as Ben was finishing his rounds, he noticed a figure in the distance near an old oak tree. The figure appeared to be digging, its form silhouetted against the setting sun. Assuming it was a trespasser, Ben approached, calling out for them to stop. The figure ignored him, continuing to dig with a steady, rhythmic motion. As Ben drew closer, he felt a chill run down his spine. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and its movements were eerily mechanical. Ben shone his flashlight on the figure, revealing the gaunt, weathered face of Walter, the former groundskeeper. Walter's eyes were vacant, his expression fixed in a look of grim determination. Ben froze in fear, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Walter's ghostly form continued to dig, oblivious to Ben's presence. Summoning his courage, Ben called out to Walter, but received no response. The spectral groundskeeper simply faded into the darkness, leaving behind an unfinished grave. Over the following weeks, the sightings of Walter's ghost became more frequent. Ben would find freshly dug graves in the morning, each one meticulously prepared but empty. He began to hear whispers in the wind, urging him to leave the cemetery. The locals, upon hearing Ben's tales, recounted similar stories from years past of Walter's undying dedication to his work. Determined to uncover the truth, Ben delved into the history of the cemetery and Walter's life. He discovered that Walter had lost his entire family in a tragic accident and had dedicated his life to tending the graves as a way of coping with his grief. It was said that Walter had made a vow to watch over the cemetery for all eternity, a promise that seemed to have bound his spirit to the grounds. One stormy night, Ben decided to confront Walter's ghost. He waited by the old oak tree, the place where Walter was most often seen. As the wind howled and rain lashed down, Walter's spectral form appeared, shovel in hand. Ben stepped forward, pleading with Walter to find peace and rest. To Ben's astonishment, Walter's ghost paused and slowly turned to face him. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, Walter spoke of his sorrow and his inability to leave his post. He expressed his fear that without him, the cemetery would fall into disrepair, and the dead would be forgotten. Ben assured Walter that he would take good care of the cemetery and that it was time for him to rest. Walter's ghost seemed to consider this, his form flickering in the storm. With a final, mournful glance, Walter's spirit slowly dissipated, leaving Ben standing alone in the rain. From that night on, the strange occurrences ceased. Ben kept his promise, maintaining the cemetery with the same dedication that Walter had shown. The townsfolk noticed the change and spoke of how Ben had earned the respect of the ghostly groundskeeper. Walter's presence was felt no more, but his legacy lived on in the well-tended graves and the peaceful atmosphere of Hillside Cemetery. Story 3: The Midnight Watchers. Greenwood Cemetery was known for its beautiful, serene landscape and its historic tombstones. However, few knew of the chilling events that took place there each year on the night of the winter solstice. Local folklore spoke of the Midnight Watchers, spectral figures that would appear under the cover of darkness, wandering among the graves in search of something or someone. One year, a group of paranormal enthusiasts, intrigued by the legend, decided to spend the night in the cemetery. Among them were Lisa, an experienced ghost hunter, Tom, a skeptic, and Rachel, a local historian with a keen interest in the cemetery's past. They arrived just before sunset, setting up their equipment and preparing for a long night of observation. As darkness fell, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the cemetery in an eerie silence. The trio moved cautiously among the tombstones, their flashlights casting long shadows. Hours passed with no sign of the Midnight Watchers, and Tom grew increasingly skeptical, teasing Lisa and Rachel about their ghost stories. Just after midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air became heavy with an unexplainable tension. Suddenly, Lisa's EMF detector spiked, and a strange, cold wind blew through the cemetery. Out of the fog emerged several ghostly figures, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes. Their eyes were hollow, and they moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. Lisa and Rachel watched in awe, while Tom tried to rationalize what they were seeing. The figures seemed to be searching, their eyes scanning the ground and the tombstones. Rachel, recalling the legend, whispered that the Midnight Watchers were said to be the spirits of those who had died tragically, unable to find peace in the afterlife. The group followed the specters at a distance, careful not to draw attention to themselves. The Midnight Watchers converged on a particular area of the cemetery, where a large, ancient oak tree stood. Beneath its gnarled branches, the figures gathered, pointing to the ground as if indicating something buried. Rachel, curious, approached the spot the ghosts were fixated on. She brushed away the leaves and dirt. Story generated by ChatGPT. Art made by Artbreeder.